This short video is going to be about integrating sources into your research essays. All semester, we're going to be using sources to support the claims and arguments that we make, and it's an essential skill to have as you go through your college career. So today we're going to be talking about summary, quote, and paraphrase, and the minimum requirements for integrating your sources responsibly and effectively. So before we talk about how to cite sources, let's talk a little bit about why we cite sources. A lot of students know that you cite sources to avoid plagiarism, but that's not really the only reason why, and it actually might not even be the most important reason why. We cite sources because citing sources builds your authority. As a beginning, incoming student, you're not an expert in most of the topics that you're going to be writing about. So why should your reader believe anything you say if you don't have supporting evidence? By citing your sources, you give that evidence and you build your own authority as a writer. Citing your sources shows your work. It shows exactly how much work you've done to read and master the knowledge you need to be able to enter a conversation. If you're not citing your sources, then your professor and your audience has no idea how many sources you've read, how much work you've done, how much time and effort you've put into really being responsibly able to enter into a conversation. Now, it is important to give credit to other voices. Nobody likes a conversation hog. Nobody likes it when you repeat something that they say without giving them credit for it. And I'm sure you've had this experience where someone is telling a story and they tell the joke that you told as though it's their own. Right? It's annoying. So it is important to give credit to other voices. It's just a responsible way to be part of the academic conversation. And by doing that, we do avoid plagiarism. Citing our sources allows us to legally protect ourselves from accusations of plagiarism that can affect your academic standing, and actually your legal standing as you go through life. So there are three basic ways to integrate sources. The first one we've already gone over this semester. We've talked a lot about summary, and you wrote an extended summary. Summaries are overviews in your own words, and usually they're shorter than the original piece. You can also quote. You might be familiar with this from your high school classes or from previous writing experiences. Quotes are maybe the easiest way to integrate sources because basically you're just taking the exact wording from a text. And then finally, we're going to really be working on this one this semester, which is paraphrase. Paraphrasing is a much more sophisticated and complicated way to cite, but it actually makes your writing a lot more effective because what you're doing is you're taking the ideas from a source and you're putting them in your own words. Paraphrases are usually about the same length as the original, so they're like a quote in that sense, but they're not using the wording of the original text. So what are some reasons to use summary? Usually you're not going to be writing an overall summary that goes on for 3 pages like we did for our last assignment, but you can use summaries in shorter snippets as background information for the topic. They're a really good way to get to the they say. It shows that the topic is important and current. By summarizing other voices in the conversation, you show that, yeah, people are actually talking about this. This is something that needs to be discussed. And that's a really essential part of strong academic writing, is that you're writing into an actual conversation and not just shouting into the void. As I said, it presents other voices from that larger conversation. It's a great way to get the they say so that you can respond to them. Summary is also really useful for giving context for quotes and paraphrases. And this might be a new skill. If you went through high school learning the 5-paragraph essay, chances are they didn't really focus on much other than just dropping a quote into your paragraphs. But summary is really important because if you're pulling a quote out of a larger source or you're going to paraphrase an idea from a larger source, your audience needs context for that. They need to know where that quote comes from, what that larger source says, so that they can understand the quote or the paraphrase better. Now, there are some good reasons to use quotations. Chances are, if you are at all familiar with academic writing from high school or earlier classes, or you use the 5-paragraph essay, the focus was probably on quotation. But as we move into more sophisticated college level writing, we're going to be moving away from a dependency on quotations And we're going to use quotations when a passage is essential for understanding. So it's really when the original wording affects the impact of what you're bringing into your argument. When the original wording is unique, this is really important. So if they're using an example or a metaphor or figurative language that if you change it, you're going to lose something, that can be very, very important to use a quotation. When the original wording provides an example that you can't really reword, that is a good reason to use a quotation. But we're going to start thinking about quotations as kind of highlighting information rather than what we depend on for information. And as we work on the synthesis essay and as we work all semester, we're going to start working on paraphrasing, which I will be completely honest, it is a challenging skill. Paraphrasing takes another step. It takes a little bit more time than a quote because it's that in between a quote and a summary. But paraphrasing can be so important to make your writing more effective. Paraphrasing is great when you have wording or an idea from an original text, but the wording itself it's really difficult. It's using a lot of big, sophisticated vocabulary that your audience wouldn't necessarily know. Or when the wording is too technical, a lot of times you're going to be pulling from academic articles that are written for a higher level, sophisticated audience for a specific discipline. They could be using terminology that the average reader is not going to understand, so that you can use a paraphrase to translate that terminology so you can get the idea without confusing your reader. It can be great when the original text is too wordy. You're going to find this. A lot of academic writing in journals. It's not necessarily good writing in the sense of being clear or engaging. So using paraphrasing can help take important ideas and put them into your own voice, especially if the writing is very, very obtuse. Paraphrasing is great because you actually can provide more clarity or succinct wording for most of the things that maybe in the past you would have quoted. So we're going to be working on that all semester, so keep a watch for paraphrasing. But as we move forward, let's talk about the requirements for source integration. There are two parts to source integration, and you're always going to have these two parts to adequately cite your source. The first part is the in-text citation. This is where you're literally talking about the source in your writing. You should introduce the source with a signal phrase, and then you're going to use parenthetical citations. So those are those little citations in parentheses at the end of the sentence. MLA and APA both use parenthetical citations. The second part is your bibliographic citation. Your bibliography is going to appear at the end of the essay. Everything that you cite in the text of your essay must appear in your bibliography, and your bibliography is going to give the publication information. So you can think of this as breadcrumbs. The in-text citation gives like an author's name. It always gives an author's name, or it might give a title or something so that your reader can take that author's name and look back at the bibliography to find the bigger information. They could take that bigger publication information and find the source for themselves. So you have to have those two parts for a complete citation. In-text citations always use a signal phrase. Usually you're also going to want to use summaries to give context. They always represent the source accurately. And then you want to make sure that you cite in the correct style with those parenthetical citations. So again, in this class, you can choose either MLA or APA, whichever you think is going to be more useful for your future academic career. You just want to make sure it's consistent throughout. And then your bibliographic citations. If you're using MLA, this bibliography is going to be called works cited, and that's plural works because you're always citing more than one. And if you're using APA, your bibliography is going to be called the reference page or references. You need to include all sources listed in the text in your bibliography. The two parts should always match. Your bibliography is always going to be alphabetical. So remember, you're always going to give your author name in the text. If your bibliography isn't alphabetical, it makes it really difficult for your reader, if they're interested in that source, to find it in the bibliography. So alphabetical order is really important for the bibliography page. And then finally, it's going to use something called hanging indents. Whether you're using MLA or APA, both citation styles use these hanging indents where you can see the second line is indented instead of the first, or if you have more than one second line, second and third line, they're always indented. There's lots of tutorials online for how to do hanging indents, so make sure that if you're unfamiliar with how to format those, you're looking that information up for whatever word processing program that you're using. So a complete citation is always going to include an in-text citation and a bibliographic citation. Your in-text could be quote, it could be summary, or it could be paraphrase, but no matter which three of those you're using, you're always going to have a bibliography. So I hope this short introduction has kind of helped you get a sense of what is going to be expected from academic writing in terms of integrating your sources responsibly to avoid plagiarism. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and let me know.